Sam! Sam, I know you put it somewhere. Where is it?
Where is what?
You know exactly what I'm talking about, Sam. Swear to Lou, if this is some sort of sick practical joke on your end, I'm replacing your voice box with a goddamn Bonzi Buddies.
I must re-emphasize, what are you going on about?
The magic, Sam. This is Fallout 4, right? A Bethesda game? I was promised big, open-world Bethesda magic. So where is it?
What do you even... Oh, this is an intro bit, isn't it?
So, to get this out of the way now, I like Fallout 4. I haven't put as much time into it as some more recent additions to my Steam bin, but when I'm feeling like I need some nice, easy gaming to untangle my brain with after an exhausting day at work, Fallout 4 is one of my first go-to choices. The gameplay loop and exploration aspects have a real no wrong choices, turn your brain off and do whatever vibe, helped with a combat system that is tragically easy, especially given my predilection towards tank builds. I admittedly don't necessarily enjoy the way the RPG elements have been stripped bare for strictly combat-only perks, of course, and I think Bethesda's desire to make the perk poster quote-unquote balanced in terms of each special stat having exactly 10 perks ended up hurting character build diversity more than it helped it. Like, has anyone ever taken quick hands before level 100? Ever? In their life? Raise your hand if you have, and then lower it back down because you are lying. But even with those gameplay criticisms in mind, Fallout 4 is just a really fun world space to just toss yourself into. Which makes it even more of a pity that the main plot that comes packaged with it ends up kneecapping that big open world fun whenever it rolls around. I feel so silly even bringing the topic up. The whole thing's a total dead Brahmin. The writing of recent Bethesda games has been discussed to absolute death and back, especially in the YouTube sphere. You can't shake a stick at the algorithm without it bringing up multi-hour videos on the subject, written by people just absolutely eager to pick every single nit in the game. Oh, the lore retcons are terrible and are ruining the game. The dialogue circle is terrible and is ruining the game. The handling of the Brotherhood of Steel is terrible and is ruining the... And you're all wrong. I'm right. Listen to me.
Stunning argument.
Okay, that's pretty obviously an exaggeration, and there's definitely merit to criticisms of lore inconsistency. It's not all baseless bitching. In open-world games like the kind Bethesda puts out, the world is a character all its own, arguably the most important one. While most fictional worlds are built around their narratives, the later Elder Scrolls and Fallout stories are the reverse by the nature of their design, having been built on a long-standing lore of pre-existing universes. Many players have been with these worlds longer than they have any individual game set in them. These series have been around a long time, after all, and quest designers bending them in a loop to accommodate their story idea instead of reworking their story to fit the world can feel lazy and unimaginative. But an intricate and flawless world does not inherently mean that the stories told in it will be equally so. And holes punched through the lore to thread narrative support beams through don't mean that the narrative is inherently doing its job worse. Like, subjective opinion here, but I like Kid in a Fridge fine. Yeah, it's not the most mind-blowing or even coherent of quests, but it's cute, and the underlying riff on the anti-radiation fridge bit from Indiana Jones fits well enough with Fallout's ray-gun gothic style of pseudoscience. And contrary to popular belief, goal physiology has always been a little loosey-goosey, even predating the Bethesda games. Vibes First Biology comes free with your 50s sci-fi pastiche. It's not perfect no-holes world building, but it balances the vibes to realism enough to at least feel adjacent to what a Fallout quest should feel like. Look, part of writing is identifying where your narrative priorities should lie and what trade-offs you need to make sure your work has the impact you're looking for. And that gets very complex when you have dozens of parallel narratives in a single interlocking world space. I'm not going to spend too much gamer rage baby anger begrudging them a few late game, out of the way side quests with wonkier relationships to wonkier lore. Especially when there are much larger narrative issues at play that would remain even if every sentence of the lore was clearly delineated and 100% internally consistent. One big issue, mainly. One that causes a ripple effect that cascades across the entire main plot in ways both big and small. A real boulder airdropped into the lake. I am, of course, talking about Sean.
My boy isn't giving his mother any trouble, is he?
Baby.
Yes, the goddamn baby. This little shit is the keystone for so much that is wrong with the main plot. And I want to talk about it, and it's my channel, so I can do what I want.
Yes. Because what the world needs is another unhinged 16-hour rant about Bethesda's game writing.
Then it's a good thing I'm a good enough writer to not need 16 hours, isn't it? No, I can break down the problem with the Sean plot into 3 simple points. Starting with... Bethesda loves a good step-out moment.
You always have that step-out moment into the world, so to say. Technology's changed, we've all changed, so our expectations when loading up a game, like, okay, I'm gonna step out, and there's gonna be this moment. Us being able to do that and have it feel new every generation, every game, is something that is really special about what we do. I like to say that Starfield has 2 step-out moments. It's cryptic.
It's not surprising. Leading a player through a cramped tutorial tunnel that opens out into a spot where you can immediately see a huge chunk of the world map, carefully created for a pitch-perfect first impression, is some solid fucking design for an introduction to an open world. Hell, Elden Ring does that shit like 50 times. It's a good way to dazzle the player with your world space. But the step-out moments aren't just important to the games for the spectacle. It's not just about the game waving its environment design at you and going, "Ooh, look how pretty this is." It's a lot about that, but it's not just that. The step-out moment is also the moment where your character is untethered from the main plot. The point where the game lets go of your hand, steps back, gestures at the plot hooks introduced by the tutorial, and says, "So, what are you gonna do about it?" Let me provide a few examples from the past 18 years. Oh god, 18 years, I'm so old. Oblivion's tutorial ends with you having witnessed the death of the Emperor of Tamriel, a key figure in both lore and plot of the past 3 games. With the bloodstains on your rags still wet to the touch, and the Amulet of Kings dangling in your grasp, you exit the sewers to face the wide open world of Cyrodiil. What are you going to do about it? You could go to Brother Joffrey, deliver the amulet, and follow the main plot. Or you could decide you don't care about any of that and run off to go do some Fighters Guild quests or whatever. Or you could do both. The early main plot has quite a few natural jumping off points if you decide your character's only going to help up until they drop Martin off at Cloud Ruler Temple. In Fallout 3, you find that your father has vanished, and the only home you have ever known has turned against you. You are forced to escape by the skin of your teeth, and step out into the barren, radioactive waste you spent your whole childhood fearing as a death sentence. With no idea what to do, how to survive, or where to start looking for the only person you know out here. What are you going to do about it? You could go to the nearest city that Bethesda's world design guides you towards, ask around, and track down your dad. Or you could turn around and go in the exact opposite direction for a few dozen hours, valuing your own newfound freedom over the mystery of the missing Neeson. Then comes Skyrim. Your execution is interrupted by the emergence of dragons for the first time in about 1,000 years, and you emerge from the cavern system you used to escape the town with the ashes of its citizens still clinging to your skin. The dragon flies overhead, its purpose unknown, but its direction clear. What are you going to do about it? You could follow the advice of the soldier you escaped with and warn the people of the nearby village, and the city beyond that. Or you could fuck off before Hadvar finishes talking and go chop wood in Valkyrie for 80 levels. And now we arrive at Fallout 4. You've just pulled yourself out of your own metaphorical coffin. Your spouse is dead, your child has been kidnapped, and you've crawled out of your cryogenic grave into a post-apocalyptic mirror of your home. You are going to go find your kid about it.
Sean's out there, Codsworth. I need to find him.
What, did you think you were going to be able to pursue your own motivations? Nah. Your motivational choices are bereaved mother or bereaved mother with... No! Deal with it. And yeah, technically you can walk off and go do other quests, but the game's primary narrative doesn't invite the same apathy towards it that previous Bethesda games do. No organic jumping off points, no ability to declare a severe lack of fucks to give. Your character cares very much about rescuing their kid in defiance of any input by you, the player. This limits the ability for a player to craft their idea of who their character is and why they do what they do, because those aspects have already been decided by the predeterminations of the plot.
Inquiry: how can Oblivion have more role-playing freedom than Fallout 4, when Fallout 4 has over 20,000 words of player dialogue, and Oblivion player dialogue is often limited to one-word prompts?
Simple. No dialogue at all is less limiting than dialogue that only caters to a specific character. Or, to put it another way, a blank page is a blank slate. Without limitations of characterization, I can basically decide that my Oblivion character of the week is whomever I want them to be. Arena champion repenting for the death of the Grey Prince at her hands? Sure thing, bro. Agent of the up-and-coming Thalmor who decides that tragic homoeroticism with Uriel's bastard prince is more fun than helping a nascent fascist uprising? Hell yeah, that's my boy! Literally just my Baldur's Gate 3 bard, but as an Oblivion bard. There is nothing stopping me. The game can't aid me in playing these characters through dialogue, but it sure as shit can't stop me from making up little stories in my head about them. Fallout 4, though, can and does. Sure, I can put in my best efforts, but then I try to interact with the main plot, and the writing team's idea of who my character should be and what she should want comes rearing its ugly head. And this has a ripple effect, not just on me and my personal headcanons, but on the game's design as a whole. First of all, it renders some build options narratively nonsensical. Like, you're going to tell me that a high-strength, 1 intelligence, crit-farming, idiot savant ripper build was somehow a lawyer? What, does Suffolk's Juris Doctor require credit hours and building grenades out of soda? Admittedly, Nate does get this easier with his canonical military background, but as a Nora main I call shenanigans. Secondly, it adds unnecessary back-end limitations for the writers, or quest designers, or... Look, no one knows how Bethesda's narrative pipeline works. Not only can I not play anything other than bereaved lawyer mom or bereaved military dad, but the writers can't write for anyone other than the center of the Venn diagram of bereaved lawyer mom and bereaved military dad, no matter what ideas they might have for literally any other character archetype. Thirdly, the nature of the plot and its lack of organic offboarding points means that every moment you spend exploring the big Bethesda world and not finding your son makes the plot seem kind of farcical. Like, we've all made the memes about ignoring our literal sun to go build houses for 200 hours, right? And it's kind of a little ridiculous when you finally do go back to the main plot and suddenly your character is as desperate to find their son as they were before they spent 2 months rebuilding the Commonwealth.
We're writing our great American novel. This is the process. This is what happens at Bethesda when you write the main story of a game, and even some of the smaller stories. So let's say, okay, we're going to write the great American novel. It's going to be this thick, and on every page will be written comedy and tragedy, and it'll be wonderful. It'll be amazing, and you're going to give this book, this great American novel, to the player. And what are they going to do with it? They're going to rip out every page and make paper airplanes out of them.
Well, Mr. Pagliarulo, maybe you shouldn't have written your Great Gatsby for the dicking about making paper airplanes genre of video game. Writing to your medium is a skill, you know. It's not an exaggeration to say that downloading the Start Me Up mod that allows players to choose whether or not they're the sole survivor, thus systemically carving the Sean plot out of my story, felt like a breath of fresh air. The second I was able to engage the world on my own terms, you know, like how a Bethesda game should be, suddenly I was having way more fun with the Institute storyline itself. I could be a disillusioned ex-disciple who wanted to join the railroad to balance their karmic books, or a member of a scrap gang who wanted to build a settlement that would light up the horizon and protect the Commonwealth from the Institute's destructive cynicism. Or I could roleplay as a runaway synth, grappling with the guilt of having replaced a living human, with the dynamic with the Institute being entirely different from that perspective. All of these characters had reasons to engage with the main plot, but they were all distinctly different in a way that replaying the main plot as intended couldn't really provide. Now, this might all seem like a silly complaint, given that Fallout New Vegas also locks you into a specific profession, and people slobber all over that game's writing.
Including you. You are people.
To an extent, yes. But there's two key differences. First of all, person who delivers stuff is a way broader career choice with a lot more ability to explore the methodology and motivations of the character in question than lawyer mom. A lot more backstories lead to mail delivery in the post-apocalypse, and the game is vague enough about how long you've been at it, leaving room for your own interpretation for how you got there. At least until Lonesome Road happens and pens in a lot of immutable backstory for you. There's a reason it's my second least favorite of the DLCs. Luckily, Ulysses is off his rocker enough that I can just pretend he's taking all his weird bullshit out on the first courier he found, and my courier didn't have anything to do with Hopeville. Secondly, the game doesn't define your motivation. Yeah, the main plot hook is go find the guy who fucking shot you, but revenge doesn't have to be the reason you do that. Maybe you want answers, maybe you're dedicated to your job and really want that chip back, maybe you're just unspeakably horny for the weirdo in the checkered suit who shot you in the face twice. That's your decision to make. Hell, you don't even have to make it. If you play the NCR questline, you don't even have to talk to Benny, ever. The game accounts for a lot of your potential motivations from both a dialogue and a gameplay standpoint, and that really helps it shine. But I'd really rather not be that guy on YouTube who harps about how New Vegas is the tit milk of the gods or whatever. I just think it's a useful point of comparison in this specific instance. So back to Fallout 4, Bethesda games are primarily games that allow you to define your own experience, and your player character's motivation, methodology, and backstory is a big way that happens. The Sean plot is a roadblock on a vital component of that patented Bethesda magic. But it's not like better video games haven't imposed the same limitations on a player character's backstory, right? The Baldur's Gate trilogy, BioWare games, Cyberpunk, these are all games I love to pieces that allow customization of characters that nevertheless have generally predetermined personalities and backstories. Especially that last one. While my V is absolutely God's favorite princess, who is different from all the other Vs, and don't you forget it, she's still V. Same voice lines as all the other Vs, same plot motivation, same connection, same friend group, same opinion of the Mizutani Shion, etc. So Clearly, while that freedom of motivation is a key aspect of Bethesda games, it's not the end-all be-all of a good RPG story in general. Luckily for the integrity of the video, I did mention 3 reasons why Sean sucks. So, how about that presentation Emil Pagliarulo gave about a decade back, huh?
Oh sweet mother of fuck.
Don't worry, I'm not here to ride the let's dunk on Mr. Pagliarulo due to a narrow-minded interpretation of something he said 8 years ago train. Not too much, anyway. Partially because that horse is stone dead, and partially because every time I have to watch that speech, I get to him calling Skyrim a biblical story, my vision goes red, and next thing I know I'm in a room surrounded by corpses with lamentations about the Christianization of Norse faith written on the walls in blood.
So that's where you disappeared off to last week.
No, I just want to call attention to what Emil says regarding Fallout 4. Or, rather, what he doesn't say. See, there's a moment in his speech where Mr. Pagliarulo goes over the themes and motifs he considers to be the core of Fallout 4's narrative. He alludes to how Fallout uses the aesthetic veneer of 50s suburban America as a vehicle for its satire. He goes into detail about how the main plot of Fallout 4 allegedly covers themes of fear and paranoia regarding the synths, and the notion of your neighbor being replaced with a lab-grown clone working for a shadowy organization. You know what he doesn't mention? Like, at all, in his entire 45-minute presentation about a game he was the head quest designer of and had published 6 months prior to that speech? Sean, you know. The primary antagonist and defining motivation for the main character, who apparently has no thematic weight worth mentioning. That's not great. To distill this particular point into a single unit of bitchery, the Sean plot and the synth plot are both competing for the same thematic space. While Emil and the team working on Fallout 4's story intended the synth plot to be about suspicion and paranoia, the truth is it ended up leaning much more into the whole does robots is people side of the Blade Runner pastiche. You can see this in how the primary focus of all 3 of the major factions revolve around a synth dilemma, and how they should be viewed and treated. The Brotherhood care about eradicating the synths because they see them as dangerous, uncontrollable technology and the antithesis of humanity. The Railroad sees them as people to be liberated, and the Institute strips them of their humanity and treats them as only tools. And the Minutemen are, also there too, I guess. Beyond that, Nick Valentine and the Far Harbor storyline also use the synth nature and the plot device of memory transference to explore the nature of self-definition and personhood, as well as the ethics of memory tampering and the impact it has on the person it's done to. The humanity of androids is the baseline of the Fallout 4 plot. But on the flip side, the Sean plot doesn't have anything to do with that. That plotline is all about family, the loss and grieving thereof, and the drive to protect your child and build a world for them to live in. That plotline is more reflected in antagonists like Kellogg and his tragic widower dad's backstory. And it's not a coincidence that people think he's a better character than Sean is, because whoops, the most interesting antagonists are the ones who mirror the themes of the story they're in. The 2 themes aren't incompatible, but they never really get bridged. You do the entire first half of the story running the Sean plot and its themes, and then you go to the Railroad for help decoding a Corso trip, and then suddenly it's about the synth plot. Even once you actually meet Sean, after that first conversation with him, the family themes aren't really given any specific sort of depth, especially if you don't side with the Institute. The Railroad and Brotherhood storylines are synth plot lines. They don't care about the Sean plot. The absolute buck wild part of this was that there was a very clear and clean way to thread the 2 thematic points together, and that's through Sean's title as father and his role as the genetic progenitor of the Gen 3 synths. Seriously, there was a lot of potential to explore what it means to be a progenitor, a parent who brings life into the world and nurtures it. There could have been deliberate and meaningful parallels between the sole survivor's desperation to find and protect their son, to Sean's own cold dehumanization of his children. Perhaps there could have been a chance to confront him on that, challenge him from the perspective of a parent, and maybe even an alternative path where one could convince him of his responsibilities towards the life he created. Like, imagine a story where Sean undergoes a redemption arc and spends his final weeks working not for the isolationist betterment of the Institute, but for all of the Commonwealth in order to ensure a better future for the Gen 3s. Wouldn't that have been cool? Wouldn't that have been actually fucking meaningful? Wouldn't that have made pursuing the Institute ending at the cost of burning bridges with the other factions carry some real risk-reward potential instead of just being told, yeah, you're in charge of the Institute now, but that doesn't mean dick for how you experience the game. Okay, thanks, bye! And Bethesda just doesn't do any of that. Sean never changes his opinion or meaningfully reacts to anything besides whether or not his mom is down with the sickness in regards to the Institute's shenanigans. He is the exact same person whether you walk away from the Institute the moment you meet him or turn on it later, and the only reason he changes on the Institute endings is because you two are on good terms when he dies. The primary antagonistic force of the story is utterly unresponsive to the ideas it puts forth. The only antagonist who's actually relevant to the themes introduced by the plot hook is Kellogg, who's literally only thematically relevant posthumously. Oh, and speaking of Kellogg...
Hex, did you not go on a tangent at the beginning of the video about how plot holes can be an acceptable trade-off if the emotional impact of the story is deeper with their presence than without?
No, don't put words into my mouth.
I am a strong and class automated mouthpiece. Putting words into mouths so you can make a point about them is literally my entire reason for existence. You harpy.
Don't get pedantic with me when I'm trying to use you to be pedantic, mister.
Fuck you.
In a story, everything is written to fit the grand ideal of the narrative. Characters, themes, motifs, world building, these are all built and molded around the capital P plot. So I do believe that some flexibility in how detailed the lore is and how strictly it's adhered to can be acceptable and even necessary. Although again, when the story is the world, that can get messy, as I said. Narrative plot holes, though, those are a little more straightforward. And no one is a better plot hole generator than the Institute and their grand baby kidnapping plan. So, the big midpoint reveal that tips the plot's focus from the Sean plot to the Synth War is that Sean is partially responsible for the Synth conflict as father. Because, surprise, there was a 60-year age gap between when Kellogg shot your spouse and when you crawled out of your cryopod. And during that time, Sean grew up to be the leader of the Institute.
In the vault, you had no concept of the passage of time. You were released from your pod and went searching for the sun you'd lost. But then you learned that your son was no longer an infant, but a 10-year-old boy. You believed that 10 years had passed. Is it really so hard to accept that it was not 10? But 60 years. That is the reality. And here I am. Raised by the Institute, and now its leader.
This was not a difficult twist to figure out ahead of time. Kellogg's sly remark of Sean being older than you remember was just vague enough to stick out like a sore thumb even after the Synth Sean red herring was first waggled in front of our face. Heck, even at age 17, I took one look at Father walking up to us in the Institute and went, "Oh, that's Sean," before he even opened his mouth. But hey, a twist doesn't have to be a big shock to be effective. The mutual joy of a writer laying down breadcrumbs and watching players pick them up can be just as much fun. There's something delightful in sharing the experience of watching someone pay attention to what you wrote enough to see where you're going with it before you tell them. It's cool if the Sean twist is obvious. But wait, if it's been 60 years, why does Kellogg look exactly the same when we meet him in Fort Hagen? Oh, it's because he had super high-tech cybernetics that slowed down his aging. Wait, the Institute has that kind of technology? Then why didn't it get employed more often? It seems really useful and right up the Institute's transhumanistic alley. Well, you see, that was a project of the previous director. And when Sean became director, he canned that project because he believed that cybernetics were a shallow replacement for the Institute's true goal of preserving humanity. And artificially built human clones that are reliant on specific technology to exist aren't an amalgamation of biology and technology. Also, the project clearly existed for a while before Sean was director. If Kellogg hasn't aged a day since kidnapping Sean, that means he must have been chromed up around then. If Sean became the director at some point in his 30s, let's say, that was 30 years the previous director could have spent expanding on and advancing the project. I know scientific experimentation takes time, but 30 years in a setting run on the laws of 50s mad science? And you're telling me the only person who got the magical de-aging implant was one surfacer merc? You didn't want the Sean twist to be obvious, and the whole Kellogg looking the same was just to obfuscate the time passage to better sell the red herring, huh? No comment. Yeah, it's pretty obvious that this entire cybernetic hullabaloo was at least partially designed to backfill some holes in the timeline. The people writing the main plot didn't want you to figure out their big twist until they told it to you specifically because they wanted you to be shocked and thrown by the big reveal. But they also wanted you to have a big climactic vengeance showdown, which would have been ruined if Kellogg was dead or 100 years old. Synth Sean carries a lot of the same baggage because he spends most of his time serving the same role, as a red herring misdirection to muddy the waters regarding what Kellogg meant when he said Sean was older. How effective that muddying was is a matter of personal experience, but once the shoe gets dropped and the color of that herring gets revealed for the scarlet that it is, suddenly the holes in the Watsonian layer of this story become gaping wide. Like, why did Kellogg have Synth Sean just hanging around in his house, Bethesda? It was the real Sean's plan. See, Synth Sean was the bait for the Soul Survivor because Sean wanted to test what the Soul Survivor would do upon waking up, and part of him wanted to believe that his parent would come looking for him. Okay, well, that's a really stupid idea for an alleged genius supervillain. First off, Kellogg and Synth Sean disappeared a while before the Soul Survivor arrives at Diamond City. How long isn't explicit, but it's always hinted to be at least a few weeks or months. In addition, even if the survivor was somehow able to figure out that Scarface McSpouse Killer was Kellogg, the survivor hadn't yet figured out that time had passed between losing Sean and waking up again. They wouldn't necessarily think that the 10-year-old was Sean, and could just as easily assume that the Scarface mercenary babysitting a preteen wasn't the guy they were looking for. Secondly, the only reason we're able to track Kellogg down to Fort Hagen is because of Dogmeat somehow being able to pick up on that lead. Ignoring the realities of how old of a scent dogs can track, let's assume Dogmeat has some sort of doggy mutation that quintuplifies his tracking ability. There was literally no reason for the Institute to know that Dogmeat would be a factor in tracking Kellogg down, and without Dogmeat, there's literally no way to pick up on Kellogg's track. Seriously, do you think any sane protagonist is going to look at some random bloodied rag stuck on a fence and go, obviously, this is our guy? We only know it's Kellogg because Deus Ex Machina tells us it's Kellogg. Thirdly, even if Sean could somehow predict that the Soul Survivor would be able to pick up on a weeks-old lead, The only reason we know how to get into the Institute is because we somehow decided we should grab Kellogg's cybernetic hippocampus and plug it into our robotic detective buddy in the memory den. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have the Virgil and teleportation breadcrumbs, and the trail would run dead at Kellogg's corpse. It's already ridiculous from an in-universe standpoint that our character would do that immediately, or that the cybernetics would be in good enough shape for that to work after we turn Kellogg's skull into chunky salsa, and it's highly coincidental that we just happen to have all the tools to make it work. But to present all of these coincidences and rogue factors as some sort of deliberate master plan of Sean's would be borderline parodic if I wasn't expected to take it so sincerely. Oh, but Sean would have known you could have done that all because obviously the Institute knows about Nick. Everyone in the Commonwealth knows Nick Valentine, the Synth Detective, so obviously word got back to them through McDonough or one of the merchant spies. Okay, sure. That still necessitates us actually grabbing the hippocampus. That still necessitates us using dog meat to find Kellogg. That still necessitates us believing that the 10-year-old Kellogg is babysitting to be a viable lead on our 10-month-old baby. Sean's hiding cookie crumbs in a trash heap, expecting us to dig them out, and the only reason we do is because the writers don't have a plot if we don't. And the only reason for that is because they really wanted things to go a certain way and decided to backfill the plot holes rather than adapt the story to avoid them. A choice that ironically only ended up creating more plot holes. Look, stories are about communicating ideas and feelings. A story that has logical holes but effectively gets across its themes and emotions is better than a story that is technically competent but bland and emotionally unrewarding. That was my point at the start of the video. But the Sean plot is first and foremost a mystery, right down to the gruff noir detective. In a mystery story, the logic is the idea being communicated. The big reveal needs to make the mystery make more sense, not less. Otherwise, it is a poorly written mystery. And nothing about Sean or the reveal behind him makes sense.
Okay, smartass, if the Sean storyline is so bad, how about you do better? He said, in a mockery of online whinging.
Oh, that'd be easy.
Wait. What?
Yeah. The whole cryo-sleep thing is an interesting way to capture the fish out of water feeling of stepping out into the wasteland, but as we've seen with New Vegas, you don't need that to onboard a player onto this world, and the pre-war stuff just bogs down a lot of character freedom of expression. There's a more obvious way to get the player into the world that ties more into the themes that Emil explicitly considers to be the center of the story without shackling the player to Sean.
And what's that?
Bunker Hill.
You have my genuine curiosity.
Imagine, if you will.
And it's gone.
You wake up at Bunker Hill, the sole survivor of a caravan that was destroyed mysteriously. When you leave the little nook you were dropped in, Kessler greets you and has some questions about you. Who you were traveling with, etc. Here you would fill out your special and name, and give yourself some room to play around with your character's identity. This version of Bunker Hill would be a lot more fortified and cordoned off from the rest of the world as its own individual cell, similar to Diamond City or Good Neighbor, and perhaps the Bunker Hill Lodge itself would still be completely intact in order to keep players in an internal area. Nevertheless, the player is allowed some limited exploration and tutorializing. As you explore and talk to caravaneers to figure out what happened to you and the caravan you were with, you notice a taciturn leather-clad fellow with a heavy scar make his way into the lodge. Or maybe you don't. He doesn't look too different from the caravaneers wandering around, after all. You also start piecing together bits and pieces about what happened to your caravan. The local medic will tell you that you and the dead caravaneers all suffered burns consistent with laser weaponry. The barkeep tells you no one had come in and out of the hill at all that evening before the attack. How peculiar. And the bald guy with sunglasses by the gate tells you how there's some kooky conspiracy theories about some place called the Institute. In any case, you're pointed in the direction of Old Man Stockton by all three of them. Stockton is the local caravan boss, and his company has suffered losses of its own, with only his old reliables being left. Trashcan Carla, Lucas Miller, Doc Weathers, and Cricket. He's strangely evasive, though, and as you ask after what he knows, it becomes clear that he's not telling you everything, especially when you ask about the Institute. You don't get a chance to interrogate him for long, though, because you both hear the sound of a gunshot from the lodge. When you and Stockton arrive, you see the scarred mercenary from before holding Kessler at gunpoint with one of her guards dead on the ground. That's not the strangest part, though. Multiple strange mannequin-like robots are with him, though you never saw them enter the building at any point. After some tense dialogue with the mercenary, who calls himself Kellogg and is looking for some missing synths, all hell breaks loose, with more synths coming in from outside. After grabbing the gun off the dead guard and destroying some of the synths, you, Kessler, and Stockton manage to make it to the utility basement, which in this version would be larger and open up into an access tunnel. Kessler's fuming at Stockton, and as the three of you make your way through the access tunnels, fighting synths along the way, you learn why. Stockton's with the Railroad, a group dedicated to helping synths escape from the Institute, and the synths that Kellogg is looking for are the ones he and the Railroad helped escape. Kessler's been letting them operate out of Bunker Hill, and this is what they get in return. The Institute's top attack dog right on their doorstep. And Kellogg's a goddamn bloodhound. When you make it to the end of the access tunnels leading up to a spot near the river, you start to head up the stairs, only for Kellogg to show up behind you and shoot Stockton. Kessler shouts to run, because this isn't a fight you can take at level 1. Although maybe a particularly talented player could actually fight him, but he's scripted to teleport away when his health gets low as a means of providing a touch more agency without risking the main plot's mid-boss 20 hours too early. Regardless, you make it to the top of the stairs and step out onto the shores of the Charles River right near the bay. This is where you get your first look at the Commonwealth and the ruins of Boston. Kessler is leaning over a dying Stockton next to the door, the implication being that she hauled him out behind you while you were running, and he tells you to follow the railroad in his last breaths. Kessler can't stay. Bunker Hill is her place, and she needs to recoup with who she can, but she tells you that Diamond City is a relatively safe bet before leaving herself. And with that, you're left alone, the adrenaline draining from your body as you look out at the world space before you. You just survived an attack from the mysterious Institute. You have no idea if any of the people you met are alive or not, and your only source of direction for answers is a single cryptic hint from a dying man's lips. What are you going to do about it? If the theme that Emil was going for is paranoia regarding the Institute, as he says in his presentation, I think this intro would do a much better job at getting that idea across much quicker. You're introduced to the primary threat immediately, details such as the Institute's teleportation are still foreshadowed, and, more to the point of this video, your character doesn't have to care about any of it, and if they do care, you have a greater say in deciding why. It would also have a larger ripple effect that would benefit a lot of the game's plot, particularly the Railroad quest. The faction would become more immediately and thematically relevant, and while Stockton's death cuts out the Boston After Dark quests, there are alternatives to replace it. Notice how the only members of Stockton's caravan company who didn't die are the ones feeding information to the Institute? You could have a quest addressing the fact that the Caravanneers are spies for the Institute, providing options to the player on whether to convince them to turn coat and spy for them, simply let them live, or kill them quickly with consequences for each one. Hell, you could still have the majority of Sean's backstory as a baby kidnapped from Vault 111 in the background. Like, you could visit Vault 111 first and find this cryo system and learn from the terminals that one of the pods had an infant in it and find Nathan North's bloody corpse in an open pod. And then you find out in an Institute terminal that Sean was taken from a cryogenic vault in infancy due to requiring truly radiation-free DNA. And then you could put the two together and be like, yo, he was the Vault 111 baby. Or you could find out about Sean's background in an Institute terminal first, and then you could end up at Vault 111, see all the cryo stuff in the open pod, and be like, yo, this was the Vault and Sean's backstory. It wouldn't be a vital part of the plot, but it would reward exploration and deepen that good environmental storytelling that people love about Bethesda games and that Fallout 4 excels at. Or maybe it could tie into the Institute story, with Sean asking you to find sanctuary in Vault 111 so he can learn more about his parents and the life he might have had if the bombs hadn't dropped, and that's how you find and recruit Codsworth.
But what about Sean as a character? He would clearly be very different towards the protagonist who wasn't his parent.
Well, yeah, sure. But I've always found Sean to be more interesting when he's the sheltered director of the Institute, making excuses for them because he literally doesn't know any other way. Because contrary to a lot of things, Sean's not entirely heartless. He's a dick about the synth thing and struggles with empathy as a whole, sure, but he does genuinely care about the well-being of his fellow Institute scientists. And the only good part of his whole Rube Goldberg mess of a plan was his motivations. He wanted to understand what sort of person his surviving parent is and longs for a connection with them. You can explore that idea without actually being the parent in question. Sean could view you, an interloper in the Institute, as his means of understanding the lives of the people on the surface. People whom he is certain are doomed, but who live on regardless. You could push him towards a particular view of the surface and the hopes available to the people who live in the Commonwealth, making him more optimistic or more cynical. More importantly than any of this, your character wouldn't be tethered to one particular background or motivation. You were with a caravan that got attacked, sure, but the reasons you were with it are yours to build off of. Were you a mercenary, a merchant, a medic, a refugee from a destroyed settlement, or a bright-eyed settler hopping on the first Brahmin out of your podunk farm town? The choice would truly be yours, not Bethesda's. The motivations you would have for pursuing the main plot, or any plot really, would also be yours. Do you want answers? Revenge against Kellogg? Do you have a pre-existing fear of the Institute and want to fight against them? Are you intrigued by their complex technology? Again, the choice is utterly yours. And that's really what a Bethesda game is about, in the end. See, I told you it wouldn't take 8 hours to explain my issues with the presentation of the Sean plot.
The script is over 7,500 words long.
Oh, motherfucker. Well, in any case, I hope this did a good job of putting my personal grievances with how the main plot of Fallout 4 is structured into words. And these are my personal grievances, to be clear. If you're a parent and the Sean plot spoke to you more than anything and you love it 10 out of 10, no notes, feel free to ignore whatever clickbaity title and thumbnail I put as a video header. Enjoyment is subjective, and unlike some people in the player base, I'm not going to act like someone's dumber or more worser at literacy just for liking something I don't. Hell, if you got to this point while disagreeing with everything I said, I'm honestly surprised and kinda grateful. You're a more patient person than I am, that's for sure. And to be even clearer, there is a lot of the writing specifically that I do adore. The companions are and continue to be some of the best that the studio's ever put out. Alan Naines, Liam Collins, William Shen, the late Eric Baudouin, all of these people contributed heavily to some of the best parts of the game's story, and I'll gush all day over the variety of interesting, well-written companions we got. Seriously, if you ever want to make exploring the Commonwealth feel fresh again, go grab a companion you've rarely ever taken with you and just do a whole playthrough, bringing them along everywhere you go. you'll get a lot of commentary that expands both their characterization and the world itself. I might honestly make a video about the companion writing one of these days. No, my biggest problems with the writing of Fallout 4 have always been in the structure, presentation, and focus of the main story itself. And Sean is the Gordian knot of weak writing holding all those flaws together, in my eyes. But hopefully the team at Bethesda learned from the missteps they made and focused their writing skills on strong character engagement and an ability to choose your own path and motivation, rather than railroading them into a specific goal and motivation for the sake of experiencing the story as intended. Ow, motherfucker! Wow, what a way to debut, huh? I do have other videos like this planned, but my next ones are definitely going to be more gameplay oriented. Still Bethesda, just more gameplay oriented, because if I do any editing like this again, I am going to explode. This was a nightmare. There was 2 seconds in this editing process that was just cursed. I want something a bit more straightforward that doesn't involve recording like 50 hours of B-roll from 5 different games. So, if you're looking forward to that, I do have other stuff planned, and in general, just if you like what I have to say about Bethesda games, drop a thumbs up and a subscribe. We'll see where we go from here. Alrighty then. Bye.
Wonderful! You're just in time for today's product demonstration. Right this way, please. General Atomics, the world leader in consumer robotics. Our dependable line of Mr. Handy household robots will free you from the drudgery of housework forever. From chores to childcare, errands to entertaining, no task is too big for Mr. Handy to handle. And our models are legendary for their reliability and durability. With proper servicing, your Mr. Handy can last a lifetime.